Thank you. There was so much in that film. It's really hard to sort of think what you most want to ask. It's clear that there's definitely a strong class war going on in Venezuela, and the whole thing about the paramilitaries I find really concerning. And the opposition seems to be gaining ground over the past sort of years, and I wondered. I mean, the film's really hopeful, and the whole idea of democracy and people speaking out, and the way people are actually urging the government to go further, instead of pulling back.
Just to respond to yours about whether or not we felt positive or negative, I think the actual Venezuelan people that we spoke to and that we live with, definitely feel very positive about it. There is a real kind of grassroots movement. The movement is grassroots, and that's where it's coming from. And the people who are involved, and that isn't everyone. There is always that problem of getting people involved, of getting people out of the houses when it's raining. It's kind of, but the people who are involved really mean it, and they really want it, and they really fight for it. But of course, the problem is further up, where there is still a lot of people who claim to be socialist are kind of radical, and they're not, and they're actually working actively to undermine it. So that's the problem, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, I think there is still a lot of positive feelings, and it's still very much in the balance.
Okay.
Hi there. Thanks a lot for the film. It's really insightful in a lot of ways. It gives a good flavour of how intense life in Venezuela is, it seems. I particularly liked the part where people were talking about the protagonistic nature that they're trying to build. And it's worth remembering that obviously we're used to just the initial form of democracy where we would just participate. Well, not even that kind of thing, which is just a representative, whereas participation is solid in Venezuela now, but they're not stopping at that. It's changing into a protagonistic nature, and it's worth looking at that as another step into the process.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's really under sort of valued, I think, even on the left, really. That it is an incredibly democratic revolution, and as you say, it's worked at both levels. They've increased and extended representative democracy, as the film talked about. But there's also these experiments, still embryonic and still, just very, very small in many ways. But the building up at a local level, the communal councils, and pooling the communal councils into communes, which are networks of community councils. Developing this protagonistic democracy, and that's really important. But it really needs to be underlined how democratic the process is, because the slur in the Western media is that Chavez is a dictatorship, and even after the last elections recently in November, The Guardian on its webpage had a poll saying, is Chavez a dictator? Incredible, absolutely incredible.
Okay, I'd just like to say, what a lovely film. Well done. Right, and thank you very much for sharing it with us. And this is a young man, a member of the trade union. I'm not really hot on the subject, right? I'm glad that I came here this evening, and I think that's one of the problems. British working people don't know what goes on at the other side of the world, right? They don't know. Although I've had a Guinness, and it was following the subtitles and everything like that, but I managed, right? It's getting that information out, and when we talk, and that's what this film has done. I feel that I'm going to go away, read a little bit more. It's going to happen in this country. What are we going to do here? Well, I would like to think that we'll fill the streets up with people. That from now until March, when we call that demonstration, that each and every one of us will get out and we will look at what they've done, our comrades have done in Venezuela by supporting, right, socialism. It's really refreshing to hear people talk about socialism. That's what we've got to introduce here. We've got to say it's not dead, it's alive, it's a living thing, right? And we're going to fight for it. That's what we've got to say in this country.
just to pick up on your point about people talking about socialism, I have to say that was one of the really brilliant things about being in Venezuela, is that people have those debates all the time. Wherever you are, people are talking about politics and democracy and how it's achieved, and and you're saying about your course, but when we were in the Bolivarian University, people were walking around with books on Gramsci and and Marx, and that's the normal discussion, which is absolutely amazing. And your other point about the media, I mean, I think you both talked about that, and I think that getting the information out there. When we were making the film, we were really, really lucky. People just gave us access all the time. People were incredibly welcoming wherever we went, and you can see from all the kind of various places that we were, and we never had any problem about getting anywhere. But that's because Venezuelan people were saying to us that they knew that we weren't getting the truth about what was happening, and please show our films to as many people as you can, so people know what's happening in our country.
I'm going to take you next.
I'm from Rock Around the Blockade. I mean, I think it's an absolutely fantastic film. I don't want to repeat what other people have said, but we've, because of our solidarity with Cuba and ALBA in Latin America, we've seen and shown lots of films about Venezuela, but I don't think anything comes close to this in terms of the sort of breadth of history, but also the detail, and like someone said, that immense feeling of people absolutely desperate to sort of galvanise our energy in a progressive way, but with basic things like education, food, housing,
But this question that was raised about ownership, private, the power of the ownership, you talked about the media, but what about the means of production? Because Engels said freedom is freedom from necessity. To free people up so that they see themselves as social beings, they have to stop being a commodity themselves. They have to stop working just to live, just to get their subsistence and live. And this, in order to be able to create that society, the state has to have control of the means of production.
I mean, the private sector is still very massive in Venezuela. I mean, in the longer version of the film, because you saw a short version, there's some a kind of chapter on workers' power, and there have been some workers' cooperatives that have been formed, and they've had various kind of experiences, because it's quite a complex situation. They're often externally there are problems. They're often kind of sort of undermined by other aspects of the state apparatus or the private sector on which they depend. And of course there are internal problems because people don't change overnight. It's like a cultural question. I think the question about, clearly a massive private sector dominated by monopolies is unequivocally bad news. I'm not sure personally that just on its own state control is the answer, because especially this state, which is very unreconstructed in many ways, is a very corrupt state still, and it's staffed by an apparatus that is very, much of it's by personnel who have no real interest in the revolution. So I think the most important thing is actually to keep on encouraging participation in different ways and building up various forms of common ownership, which will certainly could include state control, but I don't think that it necessarily needs to be just that, and I think it would be dangerous with this particular state for it only to be that, and that there are other forms of cooperatives and workers owned workers owning the means of production and kind of working with communities, which is this is very, very, very embryonic, but there were glimpses there of something very interesting and new and difficult. But yeah, I don't know.
I'm thinking about what you said earlier about what do people or how do people respond to things like this, and it sort of made me think about my time when I was in secondary school. I wasn't equipped with understanding socialism or understanding my role as a human being in a society. That's not what I felt I was being trained to do. I was being trained to look after myself, make sure I can get a job so that I can be wealthy for myself, and that's it really. That have my own goals, my aspirations for myself.
and
Yeah.
there was not such thing as society.
So I think it's very important to consider, or at least think about, what our youth of today would think about when they see it. Would it make any sense? This is total flip, like reversal of everything that we've been taught, or how to perceive our surroundings. So yeah, definitely we have to try and bring this to younger people, because like this person said earlier, or someone said earlier, you said earlier, the people we had on the video, mostly women, mostly non-white in my eye, and I think that's very, very powerful, very, very powerful, because, you know, even myself, you find yourself falling into the groove of having low expectations of people that aren't white, and that's how I was brought up, and I have to admit that. Yeah, and seeing things like that is very powerful for me, and I feel very powerful for London youth and whatever, because our character, our makeup is very varied. But yeah, that's all
I'd like to wrap up this meeting by saying thank you, first of all, to you for coming and for making it a good discussion and not just leaving me, stuck out there with silence. But most importantly, I'd like to thank Mike and Dee from Inside Film for making the documentary and coming and sharing it with us here tonight. So I'd like to give them and thank you to Jake for his role in filming.